Welcome everyone and happy Earth Day. Welcome to Design Your Garden to Attract Pollinators, facilitated by Chrissy of City Parks Foundation and Butterfly Project NYC, and Ursula Chanse from Bronx Green Up of the New York Botanical Garden. We're so thrilled to have everyone here for Earth Week with GreenThumb. My name is Mara Gittleman. I am the Workshops and Education Coordinator for NYC Parks GreenThumb. We are the part of the New York City Parks Department that works with community gardens across the city. This week we have a series of webinars uplifting the ecological benefits of native plants and pollinators in community gardens. We will be recording today's webinar and making it available on our website and YouTube channel. I will put links in the chat so you can check out all of our past webinars as well. And we'll have the recording focused on the facilitators, but you are welcome to decide whether or not your camera is on using the camcorder icon at the bottom of your screen. Please use the chat for all questions you have throughout the webinar. I will be holding on to them and we'll read them out loud when it's time for Q&A. If you have any technical difficulties as well, you can message me directly in the chat. Thanks again, everyone, so much for joining us today. And without further ado, I pass the mic to Chrissy and Ursula.
All right, hello everybody and welcome. Thank you so much, Mara. Yes, it is wonderful, our partnership with GreenThumb, and we're thrilled to be here today. I see that the Butterfly Project New York City slide is up, so I'll start there. Butterfly Project New York City is a grassroots volunteer lightly organization, I guess. We've been around since 2003 we started, and our main initiatives have been curriculum for New York City public school teachers, as well as our native plant share, which we do every year, and just basically educating New Yorkers from all walks of life about regional plants and how they benefit our beneficial insects, butterflies, bees, and others. We're going to talk more about it.
Thanks, Chrissy. And I'm Ursula Chanse, Director of Bronx Green Up and Community Horticulture at the New York Botanical Garden. Bronx Green Up is the community gardening outreach program of NYBG, and we provide horticulture advice, technical assistance, and training to community gardeners, school gardeners, and urban farmers in the Bronx. And there are over 200 of these community green spaces. You can see some of them on this map here. And we have been a partner with Butterfly Project NYC since 2003.
All right, so we're going to launch right into it. This question, biodiversity and ecosystem services. We're not going to talk about it right now. We're just going to ask, what do these terms mean to you and your garden? We're going to save about 15 minutes at the end of our presentation for a discussion. We hope that you will participate with your garden-related questions regarding establishing or continuing a pollinator garden. And we want to get into this question of how can our gardens serve these ideas or physically biodiversity and ecosystem services. So we'll revisit that question later. Food for thought.
All right, thanks, Chrissy. And so now we're going to start with some of our pollinators. First, we're going to start with some of the butterflies that we see here in our gardens in New York City. So we're going to do butterflies as well as their host plants. Host plants are what they eat in their larval or caterpillar stage. And as adults, they take nectar from a variety of flowering plants. So first here we have the black swallowtail. It's a really beautiful big butterfly. And its host plants are common herbs in the carrot family, such as parsley, dill, and fennel. Next, we have this eastern tiger swallowtail. Its host plants are black cherries and tulip trees. Both trees are really important for wildlife. And this picture on the right, you can see there's different instar or phases of the caterpillar, and you can see how they can look very different from each other in these different phases. Next, we have the common buckeye. Toadflax and plantain are its host plants, and these are plants commonly thought of as weeds. Here's the painted lady. a little bit blurry, that picture, but its host plants are thistles and plants, as well as plants in the mallow family, as well as sunflowers, calendula, and actually many other species. Next here we have the mourning cloak. Its host plants are willows, black cherries, birches, and other trees. And here's the great purple hair streak. Its host plant is mistletoe, and its name is a little bit misleading as it's only the size of your thumbnail, so it makes it a little bit hard to spot. Here we have the red admiral. Its major host plant is stinging nettle, as well as false nettle. And then the monarch, one of our more famous ones. So the adult butterfly feeds from different flowers, but the caterpillar only eats the leaves from the milkweed plants. When a leaf is cut on the plant, a milky sap comes out. And the toxins in this plant, it does not harm the caterpillar, but it helps the butterfly as an adult deter predators like birds. And finally, we have the cabbage white butterfly, which is probably our most common that we see all the time. It's the only non-native butterfly that we've shown here. And it's very common. It's considered a pest in its larval stage as it consumes our brassica plants like the cabbage, kale, and collards. So you've probably seen it munching away on some of those in your garden. Now, Chrissy's going to talk about the moths.
So we know that pollinators extend far beyond butterflies, of course. Butterflies are the ones that are the most conspicuous and talked about probably more than the others. But we put this picture here of this clearwing hawk moth, right? This is one of our best pollinators. We have a number of species of these types of moths. They look sometimes more like something else, maybe more like a hummingbird in the way that they fly. But you can see here on the left, moths are really make up a huge portion of our pollinators. And actually there are many, many more species of moths than butterflies. Why don't we know about them? Who can take a guess? If you want to stick it in the chat, I'm just curious. Why don't we know about all these moths instead of like we do about the butterflies? It's here. Actually, the answer is right in front of you. Yes, because they're nighttime flyers. I wouldn't say they're not as pretty. It's if you take a look here at the picture, I will nocturnal exactly right. Yeah. So they're poorly understood because they're foraging at night. We simply don't see them the way that we see those butterflies, but they are our specialists and we need them. There are a whole multitude of plants that simply can't be pollinated without their specialist moths or others. And here's our whopper group, really. This is the big ones, the bees. You see over 4,000 species in North America alone. That doesn't, the rest of the world, there's, I don't know, I heard a figure once around 10,000 or something like that. It's insane, the number of bees. But here on the left, we have a halictid bee, or I forgot, there's a more common name. And on the right, you actually see there is a fly there, and underneath it is a different kind of bee, right? And the reason that we included that there is because you can see a distinction. The bee actually has its wings folded while it's foraging, and the fly has its wings outright. So you can see there, over 300 species have been counted in New York City recently, right, within the past 10 years. They really win the prize for the most effective pollination, particularly those bumblebees that do that buzz pollination. How many people grow tomatoes? Did you know that honeybees cannot pollinate your tomatoes? Bumblebees pollinate your tomatoes because they need buzz pollination, those flowers, right? And most of those bees are not communal nesters like the honeybees are. Most of them are individual nesters, and they need a bit of mud or soil, not mud really, open soil, because they nest in the ground. I can't see that bottom, that could be a problem because I can't see that bottom line there, but we'll figure it out. Next.
It just, Chrissy, it's just most individuals are non-communal nesters who need the nesting cavities and soil hollow twigs.
Okay, thanks, Ursula. I might have to ask you sometimes to chime in there because my screen cuts it off, unfortunately, but we can move on. Okay, a note about honeybees. We love them. Of course, we love them because who couldn't live without honey, right? And also for agricultural purposes, they really can't be beat in terms of the way that human beings have come to utilize their services, right? But they are not native. They are not the best pollinators, frankly, in terms of their generalization skills. Just don't do the same kinds of service for some plants as our native bees, our honeybees, and our other wild bees. And we consider them livestock. They are kept just like other animals are domesticated, right? So we can talk about them more later, but this presentation is really not about honeybees. Okay, beetles, another very overlooked group of insects, but they are necessary for pollinating some of our plants. You can see here we have a beetle on a rose, that's a native rose bush, and we have some beetles on a primrose plant, right? And those plants actually depend on their beetles. Our magnolias, I'm sure that you've been noticing our blooming magnolias here in New York City. They depend on beetles for pollination. So on the left, we have our beautiful lady beetle, and they are voracious predators in the garden. So not pollinators, but they do serve an ecosystem service. And then we have our hummingbirds, and I don't think we mentioned them in this presentation, but some bats also are pollinators. But certainly our hummingbirds are important pollinators. Here, this hummingbird is actually on a cardinal flower, which you see there, and they also are great pollinators of our bee balm. We probably have a few people here who are growing some bee balm in their gardens. All right, and finally our flies. So we see here 3 different species of flies. We have a bottle fly up here on the left. In the middle, that's a robber fly. That guy's called a robber fly. Voracious predators of smaller insects, the robber flies. It's amazing. And then we have a flower fly here. And, distinctive flies, right? I don't know why this guy has his wings folded. Mostly flies have their wings out, and you can see those big eyes, right? That's how we distinguish flies. But they can make themselves look quite a lot like bees. So we overlook them sometimes, right? But be on the lookout for your flower flies in the garden. They're quite good at pollinating. Is that you or me, Urs?
That's you, Chrissy.
Thank you. Okay, so you can skip to the next one. So we are here to advocate for all of these wonderful pollinators, not just for their own purposes, although we know that insects are hugely important, but for the purposes of our plants, right? So that is an intimate relationship that one without the other, and they simply won't exist, right? So habitat is dependent upon these relationships between pollinators and their plants, right? Our pollinators also pollinate food crops. And that's not just agricultural food crops north of New York City. That's the food crops right in our gardens, okay? There is more and more science that points to the more that you promote beneficial insects in your gardens, even small gardens that are growing food, the greater output your crops will have. Ursula loves bats. Me too. So they are indicators. Our insects are indicators of clean air and water, right? So we know that if we have a healthy population of many different kinds of insects, then we're doing something right, and we can point to cleaner air and water. I don't remember why we put quieter spaces. because plants promote quieter spaces. Thank you. And then in terms of saving water, we're talking about those plants. Many of the plants, the native plants that like this milkweed that this wasp is foraging on and pollinating, just require less water. Okay, so part of our presentation today is really going to be about what are the benefits of the plants as well as the insects. So our plants that come from this region are adapted to this region, adapted to the conditions of this region, which are changing all the time. We realize with climate change, of course, but we know that milkweeds and other kinds of native plants are just simply after they have been established going to need less watering. So these are some of the reasons. Next slide, please. Thanks. So we also have lots of problems in our gardens with a number of plants that are problematic and that want to live alone without the other plants around them. We're going to talk more about them later, especially the main ones that we see, but filling your gardens in with these plants that we're going to talk more about. This is goldenrod and boneset, I think that we're seeing in this picture. Maybe, I could be wrong about that. But these plants will compete with some of these invasive plants, especially if the garden is weeded periodically, right? So these plants create really beautiful landscapes. You know, picture a whole lot of mugwort, which is not a beautiful plant. It does not make beautiful flowers. Or picture a lot that is filled with a number of different species like goldenrod, like milkweeds, and you've got a completely different vision in your mind. Yes, bats are in the Bronx. They are throughout New York City, believe it or not. We could do a little bit better in New York City to support our bats, and I can tell you about somebody who knows a lot more than I do. Thanks. That's you, writers.
Mm-hmm. Great, so now we're gonna jump into talking about how you can start or develop your own pollinator garden. So first you wanna consider what pollinators need, all the pollinators that we've just shown you. So they need a diversity of plants, preferably native plants are really important, as we've been mentioning. And studies show, which isn't surprising, that a pollinator diversity rises with plant diversity. Pollinators also need nesting and egg-laying sites. We talked about the bare soil and host plants. They also need places to shelter and overwinter. So most species of butterflies and moths overwinter as eggs, caterpillars, or pupae in protected areas such as leaf litter, dry stems, or dense vegetation. So having undisturbed areas are important, as well as doing less cleanup in the fall. So for example, leaving dead stems on perennials to overwinter. Next, assess your site. So first, take note of your existing structures and herbaceous plants, trees, and shrubs. Note what native plants you have that are already doing well. If there are plants that are not doing so well, consider moving them or removing them. Consider removing some non-native plants, especially those that spread aggressively. And also pay attention to what areas might provide wind protection and shelter. So then you want to look at your site conditions, evaluate how much sunlight different parts of your garden are exposed to. In the shady areas, note the quality of the shade. Is it light shade, deep shade? Are there sloped areas? And what directions are they oriented in? Do you have a sunny south-facing slope or a cooler northern-facing one? Also, be sure to evaluate the soil characteristics. Is the soil poor, average, or rich? Are there areas that are generally drier or damp areas where water tends to stand? So all these conditions help to determine what type of habitat you have available. For example, a sunny, dry meadow, an area of light shade like a woodland edge, medium shade like a woodland, or the moist conditions of a wetland. Then choosing your plants. So you want spring, summer, and fall blooming plants. We want food for our pollinators all season long. Ideally, we would like to have 3 species in bloom at a given time. and each species would encompass about a 3-foot diameter. So research has suggested that pollinators find plants more easily when they are growing in these larger clumps. We realize that this is not always possible given limitations of space and resources. However, this is a design opportunity for gardeners who know that placing plants together in these drifts or clumps is more attractive to people as well as pollinators. You want to choose host plants again for your butterflies and moths, and then consider plants that support more wildlife. We have this chart. So caterpillar and insects are critical for birds. And for caterpillars and insects to thrive, they need to have the native plants that they have evolved with over millions of years. So the University of Delaware professor of entomology, Doug Tolomei, he's done a lot of research with others looking at what plants sustain food webs across the United States. And this chart here shows the 20 most valuable woody and perennial plants in the mid-Atlantic region. And their research shows that some plants have been found to support many more species of Lepidoptera, which are our moths, butterflies, and skippers, than others. And here you see for our trees, our woody plants, we have the oaks, black cherries, willows, and birches. They support hundreds of species of Lepidoptera. And then for our perennials, the goldenrods are really high on the top. They support over 100 different species. So you can start, sometimes it's easiest to start small, start with a small area or section of your garden. You can gradually incorporate the natives. You want to label and mark your plants because other gardeners might not be familiar with them. And then some plants also come up later in the spring, so you want to be sure to know where to look out for them. You're going to water and weed regularly until they're established, usually the first 2 years, although weeding, as we'll talk about, will probably just need to continuously happen. And then as they grow too, once they get established, you can also divide and transplant them to other sections of the garden or give them away. And again, we want to do less cleanup in the fall and no pesticides and herbicides in your garden. And then it's always good to start with a sketch. So here's a sketch that Chrissy did that she's going to talk more about later. But sketches should be simple and drawn to scale. They're good for record keeping. And you can note bloom time so you know where you need to incorporate bloomers throughout the season. You can also include elements such as paths and make notes of where you want to remove non-native plants and where you want to incorporate more natives. And then you can see in this picture too, you can see the larger clump plantings and drift plantings as well. And then this is another example that Babby Dunnington of NYC Parks GreenThumb did, which is really nice. And this incorporates the bloom time, height, light conditions. So you see on the right, there's sample layouts for full sun, part sun, and shade areas. And then you can also see again the clumping spacing so that it's easier for the pollinators to find the different species. Now I'm going to turn it back to Chrissy.
Wonderful, thank you, Ursula. So we just wanted to give folks an idea of, how you can install these plants. And I love this, this diagram from the Xerces Society Attracting Native Pollinators, which I also love and highly recommend to anybody who is getting into this, pollinator gardening. That's an amazing resource book. But you can see here their native bee garden is just packed. I mean, I think I'm counting 5 or 6 different species in this small garden, right? So you can pack these plants in and make use of small spaces. What I love about it is that you see that there's a graduated design here. So taller plants toward the back and graduating to ground covers in the front. I cannot say enough about ground covers. Get to know your ground covers if you haven't yet. They're going to save you a major headache. So wild strawberries, violets, common violets, and plants like these are going to preserve your soil, enrich your soil, and they're going to make it harder for those weeds that drive you crazy to get into your garden. So definitely, and I don't know if you noticed on that Talamy list, under the perennials, the second plant was Fragaria, right? There you go. The wild strawberry supports 67 species of Lepidoptera, according to his research. He and his students, I should say. He has quite a team working with him. Thanks, Urs. So we can move on. Yeah. And this is a wonderful diagram for a slightly larger space, but not that much larger. And the reason that I bring this up is because if we can model the natural landscape, we have the ability to actually increase exponentially the ability of native plants and maybe not even all native. Maybe you have a beloved non-aggressive plant that you want to put in there. Fine, you know. But this type of model for wildlife, particularly insects, is ideal. We have the ground covers, we have that mid shrub layer, and then we have that tree. You noticed, hopefully on that Talamy list also, that the trees far outnumber the smaller plants in terms of their support of insects, the Lepidoptera. Talamy also has a whole bunch of other lists. You can look at his bee list and his beetle list, and he's got a bird list, I think. So he's a wonderful resource. Okay, Urs. All right, so here is a winter photo, and you know, Ursula made the remark a few minutes ago, don't clean up too much, especially in the winter. So we left this in this garden. This is one of our gardens out in Queens. And why do we do that? Because if you look on the left, that photo from Dina Garcia, all of these stems probably have overwintering insects stuck to them, also down in the grass level, right? So don't clean up your gardens in the winter. Please leave all of those stems until late spring. And if you have to cut them down because the neighbors are screaming to the rooftop, leave those stems on the ground. Don't clean them up right away. And try not to rake out your beds. You see that there is a distinct line here, evidently because there's asphalt, of course, but you, even with softer areas, you know, you can create pathways and lines that make things look neat, even if you've got something behind it in your garden that looks a little messy. Some people consider this messy. I consider it glorious. You know, it's what makes the world go round. So here, preparation. Now, there's something funny about this. Here we are with a group of young interns, and it was so much fun working with them because, you know, if you can get youth on board, you've got some muscle there, muscle and passion. I love it. And we're removing primarily mugwort. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it did help to remove that mugwort a little bit. But did it come back? Yes, it did. And does it keep coming back? Yes, it does. That's why weeding consistently is important. But move on, Urs, thanks. There it is, prepped. Okay, we got as much out of there as we could. Let's go. And here's our first planting. Okay, this was a fall planting. And then go ahead, Urs. And there it is in the spring, right? So yes, the mugwort came back, but these plants that we put in, like the Joe Pye weed and the goldenrod and the helianthus, I can't remember. I'll think of it in a minute. Maybe Ursula remembers. Sunflowers, the sunflowers came back, right? And so the mugwort comes back, but it doesn't take over. It doesn't, because we weed it out consistently. Keep going, Urs. That was the first summer. There's the second summer. You see what I mean? These plants loved this soil. Asters and goldenrods in the fall. All right, fall maintenance. So this was really the first year, so it's looking less than that second year. But it is super important to get in there and weed out before the winter, because believe it or not, even in the winter, the weeds are strengthening their root systems, right? So get them all out of there. And something that I highly recommend. If you plant goldenrods and asters and you don't want them to completely take over your garden, deadhead them before those seeds fly everywhere. Just a tip. All right. All right.
Okay. So this is New Roots Community Farm. It's at East 153rd and Grand Concourse. And we helped start this farm in 2012 with International Rescue Committee. And the site has, it's a large space. It has a lot of sunlight. It has a south-facing slope. And because the garden is on a pretty steep slope, we installed bioswales and a rain garden to help hold the water and moisture on site. So you can kind of see, this is an earlier picture, but this is the upper swale up here that goes into a rain garden. Then there's an underground pipe that pipes into this lower swale here. And then finally, any excess water goes into the drain. But we try to capture as much of the water on site. And so we also incorporated a lot of native plants in the bioswales and rain gardens at New Roots. So here's a close-up of the upper swale where you could see there's mountain mint, which is the white flowers, which is great. It can grow like almost up to 3 feet, and pretty much June through September, there's like bees and butterflies and like all kinds of pollinators all over it. And then in front of the mountain mint is this sage, the emery sage, which is also great to mix in with the mountain mint. And the swale also, it keeps moisture, and then it's also great, it provides shelter for pollinators and other insects as well. And then these pictures are more Dina Garcia pictures. She is so kind, she shared a lot of pictures for this presentation with us. And so these are ones that she took at New Roots. She's a gardener at New Roots Community Farm. And so here we have the common milkweed on your left, and then the swamp milkweed on your right, and the monarch butterfly, the monarch caterpillars that they found on site as well. There they found a chrysalis and also the pictures of the adult butterflies there. This is butterfly weed, which is another milkweed. It's a smaller, low-growing milkweed with orange flowers. And this is bee balm, this is near the rain garden, and this is another really beautiful plant as well. The cup plant, this is in the lower part of the swale. And this one gets pretty high too, about 5 feet. And Culver's root, this is also in the lower swale at New Roots. And so now we wanted to spend a little time just talking about the problematic or invasive plants that we've come across frequently. Mugworts, already Chrissy mentioned. That's a big one. It has like those rhizomatic roots, which really give an advantage in spreading. Like pretty much those are underground stems that develop roots or shoots, and even little small pieces that remain in the soil can regenerate. So as Chrissy mentioned, they just kept coming back. And the other thing, so these plants, they have things that give them advantage, like the rhizomatic roots, and also they can be early bloomers, early growers, late bloomers, and late bloomers. So they find these niches where they can really take advantage of the opportunity and crowd out other plants. So it's something that we definitely have to watch out for when we're trying to promote the native plants in the garden. This is porcelain berry. So this one has like abundant fruits that the birds love and they'll eat, and then they'll carry it around all over the place, and you'll find little shoots of porcelain berry. And first it looks like just really nice and small, but soon it's like growing and taking over. So you got to watch out for that one. Here's some more common ones. We have knotweed on the left, which again, this is kind of a misleading photo because this is in the spring where the shoots are really small and young and actually edible. They look small, but they grow up to 10, 15 feet tall and can really take over. So they also have the rhizomes that can really spread and take over an area. Next to it with the pretty yellow flowers is the lesser celandine. And that one also you have to watch out for. It's pretty much, it blooms really early. You'll see it blooming right now, and it can take all sorts of different growing conditions. It forms these really thick mats and can kind of just really take over an area. Next to that, we have the mugwort, which we already talked about. And then finally on the right, we have the common reed or the Phragmites, which takes over in more wetland areas, and that can really form these really dense stands that crowd out and shade out any other kind of plants. So that one's kind of tough to get into. We recently saw it actually at New Roots is coming up. So we're trying to deal with that in the swales as well. And then these are the invasive vines, which Porcelain Berry, which I already mentioned. There's also the non-native bittersweet, and you can see it's kind of just encircling that tree in the middle picture. And then the evergreen English ivy is also a common one. So again, I mean, just their vining habit can really grow and cover some other plants and kill trees and shrubs. So it's something that you want to try to keep an eye on and get while they're young as well. So those are the ones to look out for. And
can you go back to Ursula? I just want to mention something. So we talked about these different kinds of plants, and Ursula mentioned that rhizomatic roots sometimes, for instance, with the knotweed, can travel up to 30 feet in your garden, right? Or extensive seed production or that vining habit. So these are the ways that these plants really get a hand up. They all love disturbed soil, which is so common in New York City. We're almost always working in disturbed soil, right? But something to really think about are those root structures when you're removing these plants, right? And we could do a whole workshop, and maybe we should, on how to remove these plants so that they don't actually come back, right? But you can also look online. Recently, last year, we were tackling some of that lesser celandine that Ursula showed with the yellow flower. I just looked it up online. There was quite a bit of good information about how to get that out so that it would stay out. But replacing with other plants is essential. So just a couple of things to add. Don't get too discouraged by them. Pull some, replace, and before you know it, in a few years, you've got a different looking landscape. Thanks, Ursula. Okay, let's see. Oh, we're actually early. We did good. So we have plenty of time for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chrissy and Ursula. So much really good information packed into a very sweet and concise 37 minutes. I appreciate all of your knowledge and gorgeous photos. So many beautiful designs. Thank you everyone for putting all those questions in the chat. I have pulled them out and I'm going to ask them a little bit out of order, but I promise to get to all of them. Towards the end of the presentation, we had a question: if our brains are overwhelmed, can we maybe narrow down 3 things to buy tomorrow to get going? Starter tips for those of us who feel overwhelmed by all the possibilities.
Urs, can we stop screen sharing for a few minutes while we're in the Q&A?
Sure.
Thank you. You want to start with that one, Ursula, or shall I?
Sure. The top plants. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of depends on what you can get. Really, is what nurseries have. So definitely nurseries are much better at offering native plants than they have been in the past. But I think that would be one way to start, is like to see what you can get. You can order seeds too, but if you just wanted to like quickly get started, I would see what native plants you can get that suit your area. Look at your light conditions that you have, moisture conditions, soil. But yeah, that would be the first way to start. And then
if you're in New York City, it's a little tough. But there are a few places right now that are offering native plants. In Brooklyn, there is, Mara, maybe you remember this, the Gowanus Canal Conservancy has a plant nursery, and they are selling native plants that they're growing, and I think they're quite affordable. And just north of New York City, there is at the Native Plant Center, which is located at Westchester Community College, has a great sale. If you can get yourself up there for that, it's really worth the trip. It's coming up in May. And then also the Rosedale Nursery in Yonkers, I think it is, has a very large selection of native plants. But that's expensive, unfortunately. Rosedale's expensive. The native plant sale at Native Plant Center is better, and then the Gowanus Canal Conservancy's shop has some pretty great stuff.
And then for all the New York City community gardeners, school gardeners, we do have, you all should have received the registration for the native plant share on May 8th. So we sent out a link yesterday where you could start selecting your plants for that native plant share to pick them up on May 8th. So the deadline to fill out that form is April 28th. So just keep a note of that.
If you are a member of a GreenThumb garden, your GreenThumb contact person would have gotten that link. And if not, you can reach out to your garden's outreach coordinator to make sure you get that link.
But when you're thinking about those 3 plants, try to select something that blooms in the spring, something that blooms in the summer, and something that blooms in the fall.
Could you name an example of one of each?
Sure.
That'd be good for beginners.
The common violets that I mentioned are blooming now. You might have noticed Zizia aurea, which is also known as golden alexanders, is also blooming at this point. Both are great spring blooming flowers. Your midsummer plants are milkweeds, sunflowers. Those are the big hitters. Definitely bloom right in June, July. And then, of course, in the fall, asters and goldenrods are easiest to find. What's the pink one with the coneflower is also another good midsummer selection and easier to find.
Thank you. And I also remembered GreenThumb gardens are getting native plants as well through our distribution, the GreenThumb plant distribution. So if your garden signed up to receive native plants, then you will get them from the Greenbelt Native Plant Center, which is our partner in Staten Island that provides native plants throughout all New York City parks, including gardens under parks jurisdiction. So look out for that as well.
Somebody asked about shady plants, I think I saw in the chat. Eric Toman, who I'm looking at directly, actually has an awesome shady plant list that I have utilized myself.
Oh man, let me see if I can bring him on here.
Sorry for calling you out there, Eric. Great list.
What was the plant mentioned with the common violet?
Golden alexanders or Zizia aurea.
Zizia aurea.
I-Z-E-A.
I can write that down.
Thank you. We also have, I'm putting a link in the chat. We aren't going to share the link to the native plant share in this Zoom just because it's public and there's people from like all over the country here, but you can follow up with your outreach coordinator to get the link. We also have, if folks are looking for specific plant lists for things like drought tolerance and shade and things like that, I put a link in the chat to our growing food toolkit, which includes a section on pollinator habitat and beneficial insects since they're so important to growing food. So there's a bunch of resources there as well. Someone has a question, a GreenThumb question, and then I'll get back to the ones that we have on the list, but the reference to GreenThumb garden availability, native plant share. So GreenThumb is the part of the New York City Parks Department that works with community gardens across the city. We have about 550 community gardens that are registered with us. So when we're talking about specifically GreenThumb community gardens and programs that we have available just for them, that's what we're talking about. All of our educational programming, like this one, is free and open to the public so anyone can join. But we have additional resources, material support, technical assistance that's only available to the 550 community gardens in our network. Okay, are carpenter bees pollinators?
Yes, absolutely. Great. They'll dig into the wood of your house or your patio furniture, but they also go to your flowers to get nectar.
Great, thank you. We had a couple questions about birds as pollinators and some resources for learning more about that, and also a workshop request. So
really just hummingbirds and bats, although I am not sure that we actually have pollinating bats in the Northeast. Definitely in the Southeast, Mexico, Central America, lots of pollinating bats. But birds in our area, we have one species of hummingbird, which is the ruby-throated hummingbird, and they are extraordinary pollinators of tubular flowers. So the American honeysuckle, the bee balm, and other tubular shaped flowers.
Great, thank you. Are butterflies and moths attracted to different plants?
Yes, absolutely. So once again, the butterflies are foraging during the day, moths are foraging at night. That doesn't mean that they won't utilize the same plants. Sometimes they do, but moths in particular, because they're night foragers, are mostly attracted to white and yellow flowers. So, and some flowers kind of close up a little bit at night. Some actually open up at night for their moth mates. But as I mentioned, moths are often specialists, and so are looking for that one flower that is their partner in their ecosystem.
Great, thank you. Okay, we covered where to find plants. It is difficult, but not impossible. How do you incorporate native plants into a vegetable/flower garden?
So yeah, I can take that one. One way that we do it at some of the sites is they use the native perennials kind of as a bed end in your vegetable garden bed. So that way you could turn over the rest of the bed for your annual crops or food growing crops, but then have your native perennials on the bed end to help promote be there for your pollinators and help attract them. So that's one way to do it. And then you can also just leave some of your herbs for the pollinators, especially the black swallowtail. You can leave some of your dill and parsley and fennel for them to eat as well. So they're fun to have around.
Yeah, we have a webinar this afternoon at 4 o'clock on making teas and infusions from the herbs in your garden that are also great for pollinators.
Yes, absolutely. Bees will definitely be attracted to thyme and lots of other herbs in the garden.
Someone's asking for clarification. Are you saying on the ends of the garden beds or the garden itself?
Yeah, so it depends how your garden's set up, but a lot of times, especially in the community gardens, there are vegetable growing areas that may be like 4 feet by 8 feet or 4 feet by 10 feet. And so then I was talking about on the ends of the beds, but you could also do edges of your garden. You can kind of look at like what areas, the vegetable beds, usually you want to turn those over each year. So the areas that you're planting your native perennials or your shrub, those areas aren't going to be turned over. So you kind of want to have areas that are going to be like just for your more permanent plantings that aren't going to be turned over, and then areas for your annual plantings.
And ask around to your gardening friends about the spreading habits. If you can plant those perennials outside of your bed, right next to them, that's great. But it's a little bit of an extreme example. But if you plant common milkweed inside your vegetable bed, you might end up with only common milkweed at some point, or it's really going to try to take over.
Great, thank you. Someone says that they planted 3 false indigos last year and none seem to be growing this year, or do they grow later?
Yeah, they're not up yet. Keep watching.
Should we be planting
weeds? The milkweeds are not up yet. Lots of plants are not coming up until late May.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. Should we be planting to attract specific, more endangered pollinators? And if so, which pollinators should we try to provide habitat for?
Well, milkweeds are the ones that we generally try to always provide at the native plant share when we can. So that's the Monarchs, the one that's kind of gotten the most press, I guess, as terms as being in a place where they could really use some help. But Chrissy, do you have more to add in terms of other specific?
I mean, there are definitely discoveries of rare pollinators in New York City. We are often planting for more generalists. A lot of the plants that we're able to get access to are often for more generalists. If you're able to catch a workshop by Rebecca McMacken at the Brooklyn Bridge Park, for instance, Sarah Kornbluth at the American Museum of Natural History. These women are experts on pollinators. Sarah is a bee expert. Rebecca is a Lepidoptera, butterflies and moths. you know, they're better to speak to. Marielle Anzalone, who does Wildflower Week, can really talk to you about those rare plants that she thinks really should be more promoted in New York City. So there's a few names. Google them. Look out for when they're presenting. Rebecca sometimes presents for the Landscape Alliance. What's the first name of that? The Eco Landscape Alliance. Google that organization. They have lots of great information about more rare plant species as well as pollinators, and also about how to structure your landscape to promote all of these insects.
Beautiful, thank you. Someone bought a native mix for the Midwest and put a specific list of plants in the chat that came in that mix. What are the odds that they're also native to New York City?
So they're going to be what we call different ecotypes, right? Somewhat adapted to their regions, but definitely, you know, we find nurseries that are selling the same plants. A Prairie Moon nursery is one that's out in Ohio or something like that, and they, you know, they have all the same species that we have here. You know, the glaciers really kind of leveled the field for all of us. So you can go all the way down to the top of Florida and all the way up to wherever that glacier ended up in Canada and see a lot of the same plants. Does that mean that they really are native to our area? No, it doesn't, because they haven't adapted. Plants adapt to the soil, the climate, the weather, all of those things, right? So does it mean they won't grow here? Sure. I've bought plants from Prairie Moon and they're doing all right. So I think it's a great question. By the way, somebody that's in the Midwest, one of my favorite websites is actually the Illinois Wildflowers website. They have great information about individual plants. It's like an encyclopedia of individual plants.
Chrissy, since you mentioned Prairie Moon Nursery, that is a great one. They sell a lot of native plants and they'll ship you plugs. So that is a great source for native plants too. I know that question had come up earlier.
But if you can get your plants locally, please try to do that.
Great, thank you. Someone mentioned that sunflowers are often allelopathic. Can they be planted with vegetables?
I wouldn't. Yeah. You tell me what you think, Earth.
Yeah, I have heard that. I know, like, sometimes there's a little bit of effect, but I see so many gardens with sunflowers growing in them, and the vegetables also seem fine. So yes, I don't know how strong that effect is. I think, you know, but again, to be safe, you could just plant them, you know, in a certain area away from the vegetables, and especially because some of them do spread more, particularly the native sunflowers, you probably want to do that anyway.
Yeah, that would be my point, actually, not necessarily the allelopathy, but the spread, because if they like it there, they can, you know, they can go like gangbusters, but maybe you have space for that.
Thank you. And our last question, unless folks put more in the chat, is what's the best way to know what month to plant specific flowers? I know with things like vegetables, we have like crop calendars. Is there something similar for native plants?
I love that question. You can go, Ursula.
Okay, you can.
I do love that question.
But yeah, I mean, spring is a great time to plant them, you know, where there's a good moisture in the ground, and definitely you usually don't want to plant them in the heat of the summer just because it's, you know, it's hot and dry. You can, we've definitely done it before, but you just have to be really good about the watering. And then the fall is a good time to put things in the ground as well.
I would say fall is best. That's really my experience. And I've learned from others who are experts that if you plant your plants with a 6-week threshold between the plant going in the ground and the ground freezing, which in New York City, my goodness, we these days we've got plenty of time before the ground freezes. Those plants have time to establish their roots, go dormant, wake up in the spring, start to really strengthen their roots and grow. And, you know, Ursula and I, we don't know if we're going to be able to do it this year. We hope to, but we often have a plant share in the fall because it's a great time to get your plants in. And then sometimes we're also busy in the spring. It's hard to get that done.
Mhm. And I just want to say, like, usually when we do this workshop, it's more interactive and we have like a lot of our gardener friends who kind of chime in with their experience and knowledge. So we don't really have that format here, but definitely feel free to put it in the chat. I know people have a lot of great experiences of what works well. So
exactly, it doesn't even have to go in the chat. We have, I think 5 minutes, Mara, maybe not quite that. She might want to wrap it up before that, but if you want to say something, just pipe up. If you've got some information to share, we'd love to hear from you.
All right, so I'm gonna close out the webinar and the recording, and then I'll change the settings to let everyone unmute.
Oh, actually, Mara, would you mind if Ursula just very quickly added the last couple of slides? If you could represent, Ursula, and just so that they're part of the recording. We have 2 resource slides. CPF is City Parks Foundation. That's my workplace. Thank you. I would love for people just to have as part of that recording those last 2 slides.
Great, thank you so much. And if it's easy to copy and paste some of those links into the chat as well, I'm sure folks would find that helpful. Thank you so much, Chrissy and Ursula, for sharing all your knowledge with us today. I do miss being with you guys in the garden, talking about these same things. And we will be at some point again, but this allowed us to share with folks from all over the country, which was very, very cool. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, for all of your great questions. And we hope that you join us for additional webinars in the future. I hope everyone has a happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day, 50th anniversary. Woohoo! Thank you so much.